"Take this baby and throw him away," he barked, his voice booming through the small hut. Chinasa froze, her heart skipping a beat. "What?" she whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. Surely she hadn't heard him correctly. "But he's our child," she said, her voice trembling as tears welled up in her eyes. Ado's face twisted in rage. "He is not my child," he roared. "This boy is a curse from the evil one. Children are supposed to be a blessing, but since he came into my life, all I've known is pain and tears." In the heart of a very beautiful village called Amando, there lived a young man named Ado. Ado was not just an ordinary young man. He was known far and wide for his hard work. From dawn until the stars filled the night sky, Ado worked tirelessly on his family's farmlands. His family owned vast pieces of land, stretching out with rich fertile soil where all kinds of crops grew. Ado, being the determined person he was, saw this as an opportunity to make something great of himself. He plowed the fields, planted seeds, and tended to the crops as though his life depended on it. Over time, his hard work paid off. The crops flourished, and soon Ado became incredibly wealthy. Among all the young men of his age, none could match his success. His wealth and success made him stand out, and people began to talk about him with respect. In every gathering of elders, his name would come up. "Look at Ado," they would say. "See how hard work and dedication can lead to greatness." The elders would often use Ado as an example when giving advice to younger men. With all his wealth, Ado was able to build a fine hut on a piece of land chosen for him by the community. It wasn't long before he began to feel that something was missing in his life. He had wealth and respect, but now Ado wanted something more. He wanted a family. He knew it was time to settle down, find a wife, and start building a home of his own. The news spread quickly across the village, and soon many of the village maidens had their eyes on him. Ado was not only rich, he was also handsome and hardworking. Any woman in the village would feel proud to have him as a husband. He had proven that he could provide for his family, and the maidens saw this as a great opportunity. They believed that Ado would take excellent care of his wife, ensuring she lacked nothing. Every evening, the maidens would walk together to the village stream, chatting away about the latest happenings. It wasn't long before their conversation always turned to Ado. Whenever his name was mentioned, the girls would giggle with excitement. "Any woman lucky enough to marry Ado will be blessed," one of them would say, clapping her hands in delight. "He is strong, handsome, and look at how well his farms are doing. If only he would notice me, I wouldn't hesitate to marry him," another would add with a big smile. The girls would laugh and dream as they walked down the dusty paths towards the stream, each of them secretly hoping that Ado would one day choose her. But there was one maiden in the village who was unlike the others, and her name was Chinasa. Everyone in the village knew her for her gentle and kind heart. She had shown incredible love and dedication, especially when her mother was very sick. Chinasa had done everything a daughter could possibly do. She worked tirelessly, going to the farm to make sure they had enough food, going to the market to sell their goods, and even cleaning and caring for her sick mother every single day. There wasn't a task too hard or too tiring for Chinasa when it came to her mother. The people of the village watched her closely and admired her deeply. They saw how she carried such heavy burdens on her young shoulders and never complained. This made the villagers speak highly of her. They would often say Chinasa has a heart of gold, and they meant every word. Everyone loved her for her kindness, her strength, and her selflessness. It was this same Chinasa who caught the eye of Ado. Ado had heard many people talk about her, but it was his mother who often spoke of Chinasa's goodness. She admired how Chinasa had taken care of her sick mother without any help or pity from anyone. Ado, who was used to hearing these praises, didn't think much of it until the day he saw Chinasa at the stream. She wasn't like the other maidens, who were always trying to get his attention. Chinasa was quiet, graceful, and seemed to carry an inner strength that made her stand out. From that very moment, Adon knew deep in his heart that Chinasa was the woman he wanted to marry. He couldn't explain it, but he felt a strong connection to her, as if she was the one he had been waiting for all along. However, things didn't go as smoothly as Ado had hoped. Despite his wealth and status in the village, Chinasa didn't seem to like him. She wasn't impressed by his riches or the fact that he was well respected. But Ado wasn't one to give up easily. He knew what he wanted, and that was Chinasa. So, he tried everything he could think of to win her over. He would bring her gifts, beautiful clothes, sparkling jewelry, and even bushmeat, which was considered a rare treat in the village. But no matter what Ado did, Chinasa refused his gifts. She wasn't interested in any of it. Ado grew frustrated, but his determination never wavered. He then thought of another plan. Since Chinasa seemed to trust her best friend Oluchi, Ado decided to ask for her help. He approached Oluchi one day and pleaded with her to speak to Chinasa on his behalf. Oluchi, being a good friend to Chinasa but also recognizing Ado's good heart, agreed to help. She promised to talk to Chinasa and try to convince her to at least give Ado a chance. While all of this was happening, the other maidens in the village couldn't understand why Ado was chasing after Chinasa, an orphan girl who didn't have much. To them, Ado could have had any maiden he wanted. They couldn't see what made Chinasa so special. Why is Ado wasting his time on Chinasa? One of the maidens would complain. Look at me. I would marry him in a heartbeat. But he doesn't even look my way. What does Chinasa have that I don't? Another maiden would nod in agreement, frustrated that Ado's attention was so fixed on someone they considered less worthy. But Ado didn't care what they thought. His heart had already chosen, and nothing was going to change his mind. One cool evening, as the sun was setting and the air was filled with the smell of cooking fires, Oluchi made her way to Chinasa's house. She had been thinking about her friend a lot lately, especially after Ado had come to ask for her help. When Oluchi arrived, she found Chinasa cooking, stirring a pot of soup over the fire. "Nem, how are you?" Chinasa asked, with a warm smile as she welcomed Oluchi inside. They both sat down, happy to finally catch up. It had been a while since they had time to talk, as both friends had been so busy with their own lives. They started chatting, laughing and sharing stories about the latest happenings in the village. "So, did you hear that Nkiru is getting married?" Oluchi said, leaning in with excitement. Chinasa's eyes widened. "Wait, you don't mean it?" she asked, not sure she had heard correctly. "I'm serious," Oluchi replied, nodding. "Nkiru is getting married." "Nkiru, the short girl? Hey, this is good news," Chinasa exclaimed, clapping her hands in delight. "I know all those maidens who used to mock her will keep quiet now. At least, they will understand that marriage isn't about size." "Exactly," Oluchi laughed, agreeing wholeheartedly. They both shared a laugh, imagining how the news of Nkiru's marriage would silence the village gossips. After a moment, Oluchi's tone shifted. She leaned in closer to Chinasa. "So, my friend, there's something I want to tell you." "What is it?" Chinasa asked, her curiosity piqued by the serious look on Oluchi's face. "It's about Ado. He came to see me," Oluchi began. Chinasa opened her mouth to speak, but Oluchi quickly raised her hand to stop her. "Wait, I know what you are about to say, but listen to me first. Chinasa, that man loves you so much. Do you even know how many girls in this village would give anything to be with him? Ado is young, rich, hardworking and handsome. Please, just give him a chance to love you. You've been through so much already and you deserve a good man by your side." Chinasa sat in silence for a moment. Her eyes looked down at the ground and her heart felt heavy. "I'm just scared, Oluchi," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared. You know how my father loved my mother, but when she got sick, he abandoned us before he died. My mother was so heartbroken. I don't think I could bear going through something like that again. I don't even know if I ever want to marry." "Tofiakwa, the gods forbid such thing," Oluchi exclaimed, shaking her head vigorously. "Chinasa, you are not your mother and your fate is not the same as hers. Don't let the past hold you back from happiness. Who knows, maybe the gods want to reward you for all the good things you did for your mother. I truly believe Ado is a good man. You should marry him." Chinasa sighed, still unsure. "I don't know, Oluchi. I just don't want a man who will abandon me when things get bad." Oluchi took her friend's hand and squeezed it gently. "Why do you always think about the worst? Not everything has to go wrong. Ado seems like a man who would stand by you no matter what. Give him a chance. You deserve to be happy." Chinasa didn't say anything more. They spent the rest of the evening talking about lighter things, laughing and reminiscing about their childhood. But Oluchi's words stayed in the back of Chinasa's mind. After that conversation, Chinasa began to think more about Ado. Maybe Oluchi was right. Ado had been nothing but kind and patient with her. He never pressured her and always respected her space. Slowly, Chinasa decided to give him a chance. As they started spending more time together, Chinasa began to see a different side of Ado. He would visit her every day, bringing her fresh fruits from the farm or delicious bushmeats that he had hunted. He didn't try to impress her with flashy gifts. Instead, he showed her how thoughtful he could be. Ado loved how Chinasa appreciated the little things, and they would often sit under the stars talking and laughing for hours. They shared stories about their lives, their dreams and their fears. The more time they spent together, the more Chinasa's heart softened. Soon, she found herself falling deeply in love with him. Oluchi had been right all along. Ado wasn't like other men. He treated Chinasa with respect and kindness, and he brought a light into her life that she hadn't felt in a long time. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, Ado finally asked Chinasa to marry him. Their wedding was the talk of the entire village. Ado spared no expense in making sure the ceremony was grand and unforgettable. People from all around the village came to celebrate with them, singing, dancing and sharing in the joy. Chinasa looked stunning in her traditional attire, and Ado couldn't take his eyes off her the entire day. He was overjoyed, not just because he was marrying the most beautiful maiden in the village, but because he was marrying the kindest, most selfless woman he had ever known. Chinasa too felt a happiness she hadn't thought possible. The couple were filled with happiness after their beautiful marriage ceremony. Life seemed perfect and everything was going smoothly. Their farms were flourishing with crops. Their home was peaceful and laughter filled their days. Ado couldn't believe how lucky he was. Chinasa, his beloved wife, was everything he had ever dreamed of in a partner. She was so respectful, always putting others before herself, and she cared for him with a love that was pure and deep. Ado often found himself smiling, just thinking about how he had made the best decision by choosing Chinasa to be his wife. Chinasa on her part was also filled with joy. She took care of their home and made sure Ado had everything he needed. Every morning, she woke up early to prepare food for him before he went to the farm. And every evening, she welcomed him with a warm meal and an even warmer smile. They shared quiet moments together, laughing and talking about their future. It seemed like nothing could ever go wrong, and Ado often thanked the gods for blessing him with such a wonderful wife. A few months into their marriage, Chinasa became pregnant and their happiness grew even more. The news brought an extra sparkle to Ado's eyes and he was overjoyed. To celebrate, he prepared a special dinner for his wife, cooking her favorite dishes and decorating her rooms with flowers. As they sat together eating and laughing, Ado couldn't stop staring at her. His heart was filled with gratitude, and he couldn't help but smile. "You've made me a very happy man," he said to Chinasa, his eyes full of love. "You're such a big blessing to me." Chinasa smiled back, her heart full. She was also happy beyond words, knowing she had married a man who loved and cared for her so deeply. She looked forward to the future they would build together with their child on the way. As Chinasa's pregnancy progressed, Ado became even more protective of her. He pampered her like a delicate egg, making sure she never had to do any hard work. He didn't want anything to happen to her or their unborn child. Ado even went as far as hiring a maid to help with the house chores, so Chinasa could rest and stay healthy. Every day he made sure she ate well, and he would check on her constantly, asking if she was comfortable or needed anything. Chinasa feeling so loved and cared for, was grateful for Ado's tenderness and devotion. The months passed, and soon it was time for the baby to arrive. One midnight, while the village was quiet and still, Chinasa suddenly went into labor. She cried out in pain, and Ado, hearing her, jumped up in a panic. His heart raced as he rushed to her side. Without wasting any time, Ado gently carried her in his arms and ran all the way to the midwife's house. His mind was filled with worry, and he prayed that nothing would go wrong with his wife or their child. He ran as fast as his legs could carry him, not caring about the distance or the darkness of the night. When they reached the midwife's house, the elderly woman immediately began to attend to Chinasa. Ado waited outside, pacing back and forth, his heart pounding with both fear and excitement. Every second felt like an eternity as he listened to the sounds coming from inside the house. And then, finally, a cry filled the air, a baby's cry. Ado rushed inside to find the midwife smiling down at Chinasa, who was holding their newborn child in her arms. Chinasa had given birth to a bouncing baby boy. Ado's heart swelled with joy and tears filled his eyes. He couldn't believe how lucky he was. His heart overflowed with love for Chinasa and their newborn son. At that moment, everything seemed perfect. But you know, life has a way of testing you when you least expect it. Ado and Chinasa named their beautiful baby boy Obinna, and his birth brought joy not only to their home but to the entire village. Everyone came to celebrate with them, singing and dancing to welcome the new child. Their families were overjoyed, and it seemed as though the couple's happiness would last forever. But just a few weeks after Obinna's birth, something troubling began to happen. Chinasa noticed that Obinna was always crying, and no matter what she did, he wouldn't stop. At first, she thought he might have a fever or be in some kind of discomfort. Like any caring mother, she tried to soothe him, offering him her breast, but Obinna refused to suck. This wasn't normal, and Chinasa's worry began to grow. Day after day, the crying continued, and the baby began to lose weight. His once chubby cheeks grew thinner, and his tiny body seemed to grow weaker with each passing day. The couple tried everything they could think of. They prepared herbs and medicines, visiting local herbalists and healers, hoping that something would work. But nothing seemed to help, as Obinna's health continued to decline. Their once lively and joyful home became filled with silence and sadness. The laughter that used to echo through their home was now replaced with worry and tears. It felt as though a dark cloud had settled over them, and Chinasa's heart ached as she watched her baby suffer. Ado, too, was devastated. He couldn't bear to see his son in pain, and he became desperate to find a solution. He visited every herbalist in the land, even if it meant traveling far away from the village. Ado was willing to do anything to save his son. No mountain was too high to climb, no river too wide to cross. He was determined. If a herbalist asked for a hen, he would bring. If they asked for a goat or a cow or any other animal, he would provide it without hesitation. But no matter what he did, Obinna's condition only worsened. Chinasa was heartbroken. She watched her baby cry every day and nothing seemed to help. She held him close, rocking him in her arms, praying for a miracle. But day after day, her prayers went unanswered. Ado, on the other hand, was growing more and more frustrated. He had spent all his savings on treatment for their child, but nothing had worked. The joy Obinna had brought into their lives seemed to fade, replaced by pain and sorrow. Ado's frustration soon turned into anger. He couldn't understand why this was happening to them. Since the day he was born, he has brought nothing but pain into their lives. Ado would scream at Chinasa whenever she tried to confront him. "This child was sent to destroy me," he would shout, his voice filled with rage. Chinasa couldn't believe what she was hearing. How could Ado say such things about their own child? But Ado's heart had grown cold. He no longer saw Obinna as a blessing. Instead, he saw him as the cause of all their suffering. As the days turned into weeks, Ado's anger only grew worse. He became aggressive, lashing out at Chinasa over the smallest things. If she made a mistake while cooking, he would yell at her. If she didn't clean the house the way he wanted, he would shout and storm out of the house. Nothing seemed to make him happy anymore. Ado began spending all his time away from home, sitting in bars, drinking from morning till night. He would come home late, reeking of alcohol, and barely speak to Chinasa. Chinasa didn't know what to do. She had never imagined that her life would take such a painful turn. She had once thought that she and Ado would always be happy, that they would live a life full of love and laughter. But now, she barely recognized the man she had married. The kind, caring Ado she once knew had turned into someone cold and distant, and it broke her to see him like this. But what could she do? She couldn't question the gods. They had given them a child, and now that child was sick. Chinasa didn't understand why this was happening to them, but she felt powerless. Every day, she held Obinna close to her chest, rocking him gently, her tears falling onto his tiny face. She whispered prayers to the gods, pleading for their help, begging them to heal her son. But the days stretched on and there seemed to be no answer. One stormy night, the rain poured heavily from the dark skies and the wind howling through the trees as Ado stumbled back home, drunk and filled with frustration. Just like every other night lately, the once proud and hard-working man was now a shadow of himself. His clothes were soaked, his eyes red, and his face twisted in anger. As he entered their small hut, the sound of his son's crying greeted him, the very sound that now haunted his every waking moment. It had been over a year since Obinna was born, and yet the child hadn't grown like other babies. Ado couldn't understand why his son was so different, so weak and so sick all the time. He had tried everything. He had sold all his lands, spent every penny he had, visited every herbalist, but still nothing changed. The child remained frail and his cries filled their home day and night. As Ado stood in the doorway, dripping wet, he stared at his son with a coldness that scared even him. He looked around the hut, at the emptiness where once there had been wealth and comfort, and he felt only bitterness right now. Everything he had worked so hard to build was gone. His wealth, his lands, his peace of mind, gone because of this child. In his drunken haze, anger rushed through him like a river that had broken its bank. His eyes fell on Chinasa, who was gently cradling the crying son, trying to comfort him like she had done so many nights before. But this time, Ado's anger was too much to bear. Without thinking, the words flew out of his mouth, sharp and cold. "Take this baby and throw him away," he barked, his voice booming through the small hut. Chinasa froze, her heart skipping a beat. "What?" she whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. Surely she hadn't heard him correctly. "But he's our child," she said, her voice trembling as tears welled up in her eyes. Ado's face twisted in rage. "He is not my child," he roared. "This boy is a curse from the evil one. Children are supposed to be a blessing, but since he came into my life, all I've known is pain and tears. I don't want him. Throw him away." Chinasa's heart shattered at his words. Tears streamed down her face as she fell to her knees, pleading with him. "Obim, please," she sobbed. "Let's wait for the gods to take him or heal him. I can't throw my own child away." Ado's face darkened even more. "Don't you dare call that thing a child," he spat. "Now pick him up and follow me. If you don't throw him away, I will strangle him myself." Chinasa looked up at Ado, her heart pounding with fear. The man standing before her wasn't the Ado she had fallen in love with. His eyes were wide with rage, and his entire body shook with fury. She had never seen him like this before, and a fire in his eyes told her that he meant every word he was saying. The baby's cries grew louder, as if sensing the danger, but Ado didn't care. He snatched the baby from her arms, his grip rough, and stormed out of the hut into the rain. Chinasa following him behind, crying and begging for mercy. The night was pitch black, the rain falling harder as they walked through the village. The cold wind wiped against their faces, and the baby's cries seemed to echo through the storm. Chinasa's heart broke with every step. She couldn't believe this was happening. Her precious son, the child she had carried and cared for, was being taken away to be abandoned. Her pleas fell on deaf ears as Ado marched through the mud, his mind set on one thing: to get rid of the child he believed had been cursed. When they reached the edge of the village, Ado stopped. Without a second thought, he flung the baby into the bushes, his face hard and unfeeling. The tiny body tumbled into the wet leaves, the baby's cry echoing in the dark night. Ado turned away, hoping that the rain and cold would finish what he had started. "Let the rain beat him to death," he muttered as he grabbed Chinasa by the arm, dragging her back towards their hut. Chinasa's cries filled the night as they walked back. Her heart ached for her son, left all alone in the cold, wet bushes. She couldn't stop thinking about his tiny face, his weak cries. Back at the hut, Chinasa couldn't stop crying. The image of her baby lying helpless in the rain played over and over in her mind. She could still hear his cries, echoing in her heart. She prayed silently, begging the gods to protect him, to keep him safe. She knew she couldn't leave him out there to die. As soon as Ado finally fell asleep, snoring loudly from his drunken state, Chinasa saw her chance. She quietly slipped out of bed, her heart racing with fear and hope. She opened the door and ran out into the cold, stormy night, her bare feet sinking into the wet ground. The rain hadn't stopped, and the wind howled in her ears, but she didn't care. All she could think about was getting to her baby. She ran as fast as she could, her breath coming in short gasps. Her heart pounded in her chest as she neared the bushes where they had left him. But as soon as she got closer, a new fear gripped her. The cries. She couldn't hear them anymore. The sound of her baby's cries, which had been so loud in her ears, was gone. Her heart sank and tears blurred her vision. What had happened? Was she too late? Could her baby have already? Panicked, she searched the bushes, calling out for her son. She searched everywhere, every corner of the bush, but her baby was nowhere to be found. Her hands trembled. As she pushed aside the wet leaves, her voice cracking with desperation. "Obinna! Obinna!" she cried. The baby was gone. Chinasa fell to her knees, her body trembling with grief. What had happened to her son? Had the rain claimed his life, or had something else taken him? She didn't know. All she knew was that her baby was gone, and her heart was broken beyond repair. After hours of searching in the rain, her body weak and her spirit crushed, she slowly made her way back to the hut, her mind filled with unanswered questions and the unbearable pain of a mother who had lost her child. Somewhere in another quiet village, in the same kingdom, a very happy madman is holding the crying baby and rocking him to stop crying. Onyara, as everyone called him, was a familiar sight in the village. He wandered the streets every day, wearing ragged clothes and talking to himself, always searching for scraps of food. Though he was mad, he was harmless, and the villagers found him amusing. They would sometimes give him bits of food, and he would make them laugh with his strange dances and songs. That night, as the rain poured down, Onyara was searching through the bushes near the edge of the village, hoping to find something to eat. Suddenly, he heard a faint cry. At first, he thought it was the wind, but as he listened closely, he realized that it was the sound of a baby crying. Curious, he followed the sound through the rain, his heart racing with excitement. He had never heard a baby cry like this before, especially not in the middle of the night. As he got closer, he saw a tiny figure lying in the bushes. It was a baby, soaked from the rain and shivering from the cold. "Oh, my baby," Onyara cried out joyfully. Without a second thought, he scooped the baby into his arms, holding him close to his chest. Despite being a madman, a strange happiness filled his heart as he cradled the child. He rocked the baby gently, trying to stop the crying. "Mama is here for you," he whispered softly, his voice surprisingly tender. "Please, stop crying." But the baby wouldn't stop. His tiny body trembled in the cold, and his cries only grew louder. Onyara looked around, confused. He had never cared for a baby before and didn't know what to do. He tried offering the baby some of the food he had found, but the baby refused to eat. Nothing seemed to work, and Onyara began to panic. He didn't want this new baby to cry. Desperate, he started to hum a lullaby, rocking the baby side to side in his arms. To his surprise, the baby's cries slowly softened. The little one's eyes fluttered close, and before long he had fallen into a peaceful sleep. Onyara beamed with joy. He had never felt this happy in his life. "My baby," he whispered again, this time with a wide grin on his face. He gently carried the baby out of the rain, shielding him with his own tattered clothes. He spent the entire night watching over the child, never once taking his eyes off him. This baby, this tiny life he had found in the bushes, was now his. The next morning, just as the sun was rising, Onyara strapped the baby to his back with a long piece of cloth, determined to continue his usual routine of searching for food. But now, he had a new purpose. He had to find food for both himself and his baby. As he walked through the village, the people stared at him in shock. They had known Onyara for years, but had never seen him with a baby. Whispers filled the air as people pointed at the madman carrying the baby on his back. "Where did Onyara get that baby?" the villagers murmured to each other. "Whose child is he carrying?" No one knew the answer, and when they asked Onyara, he simply smiled and replied, "It's my baby, the child the gods has given me. Call him Nwachi." His words made the villagers laugh, but deep down they were concerned. They could hear the baby crying, and it didn't seem like he was going to stop anytime soon. But Onyara didn't mind. He happily walked through the village rocking the baby as he passed by, humming the same lullaby he had sung the night before. The villagers watched him closely, puzzled by what they saw. They had never known Onyara to be dangerous, but seeing him with a crying baby worried them. They offered him food and even clothes for the baby, but he refused. Instead, he preferred to dress the baby in colorful scraps of nylon and old rags. Every day, Onyara would walk through the village, proudly showing off his baby. And every day, the baby's cries would echo through the streets of the village. As days passed, the baby's health began to worsen. His body grew weaker and his cries became softer and more pitiful. The villagers didn't know what to do. Onyara was fiercely protective of the child and wouldn't let anyone come near him. Whenever someone tried to get close, he would shout, "Stay away! This is my Nwachi, the gift from the gods." The villagers didn't want to upset him, so they kept their distance, even though they knew the baby was suffering and needed help. Meanwhile, Chinasa's heart remained heavy with the pain of losing her first child, Obinna. Every day, she was haunted by the thoughts that some wild animal had devoured her baby in the bush that fateful night. The guilt and sadness weighed heavily on her, making her feel like a part of her had died with him. Obinna had been an innocent, helpless child, and it broke her heart that he had suffered so much. She often wept in silence, wondering if she could have done something differently to save him. But she had no answers, only grief. As for Ado, life had been unkind to him since that night. He was a shadow of the man he used to be. The once successful farmer, whose land had always yielded bountiful harvests, was now struggling to make ends meet. The same land that had once brought him wealth now seemed cursed. No matter how hard he worked, nothing grew the way it used to. His savings were gone, his pride shattered, and he barely had enough to eat. The frustration ate at him daily. He blamed himself, he blamed the gods, and sometimes he even blamed Chinasa. He felt like everything had been lost the day they threw their baby into the bush. Ado and Chinasa no longer shared the joy and love that once filled their home. They lived together like strangers, barely speaking to each other. The laughter that once echoed through their home had disappeared, replaced by cold silence. It was as if a dark cloud had settled over their lives, and neither of them knew how to find their way out of the gloom. Years passed, and in the other village, Onyara the madman still carried the baby. Despite the baby's constant cries and worsening health, he refused to give up on the child. The villagers still saw him every day parading the baby around like a treasure, calling him Nwachi, the child given to him by the gods. The baby remained sick, but strangely he did not die. It was as if the child was clinging to life, even though he was weak and frail. One day, a very wealthy man was passing through the village. He was a well-traveled man, used to seeing all sorts of strange things. But what he saw that day stopped him on his tracks. There, in the middle of the village, was a madman walking through the streets with a dirty, sickly child strapped to his back. Both the man and the child were covered in dirt, their clothes ragged and torn. The wealthy man couldn't take his eyes off them. Who was this child, and why was he with a madman? Where was the child's mother? How could the villagers allow such a thing to happen? Filled with curiosity and concern, the wealthy man approached a group of women sitting by the roadside. He asked them about the madman and the child, hoping to understand the strange sight before him. The women exchanged glances before one of them spoke up. "That's Onyara," she explained. "He's been wandering the streets for years. But a few years ago, we started seeing him with a baby. No one knows where the child came from. Onyara claims the gods gave him the baby and he calls him Mwachi. The child is always crying, but Onyara won't let anyone come close to help. He is very protective of the child, though the baby looks sick and weak." The wealthy man listened carefully, his heart aching as he heard their story. He couldn't bear the thought of leaving the child in such a state. The child was clearly suffering, and it didn't seem like Onyara in his madness could provide the child the care needed. Something had to be done. "I can't leave this child like this," the man thought to himself. He called over his men, 4 strong, able-bodied men, who always accompanied him on his travels. "Go after that madman," he instructed. "Take the child from him. The child needs help." His men nodded and set off to find Onyara, who was still walking through the village, probably carrying the child. When they approached him, the madman sensed danger. He clutched the child tightly to his chest, backing away from the approaching men. "No, my Nwachi," he screamed, his voice filled with panic. "He is my baby. The gods gave him to me." The men tried to reason with Onyara, but he refused to let go of the child. Desperate to protect the baby he believed was his, Onyara fought with all his strength. His wild eyes blazed with anger and fear as he kicked, punched, and struggled against the four men. But despite his fierce resistance, the men eventually overpowered him. It was a tough fight, but they managed to pry the child from his grip. Onyara collapsed to the ground, screaming in agony as they took the baby away from him. My Mwachi, he wailed, tears streaming down his face. The villagers watched in silence, some pitying the madman, while others felt relieved that the child was finally being taken from him. The wealthy man stood by, watching the scene unfold. He was determined to give the child a better life. He couldn't bear to see the little child suffer any longer, and he knew he had to do something before it was too late. Onyara's cries echoed through the village as the car sped away, carrying Mwachi far out of his reach. He continued wailing and screaming, "Mwachimo, my child, my child." His grief was raw and deep, and even the villagers who had known him as a harmless madman felt a wave of pity wash over them. They had never seen Onyara like this before. He was so broken, so devastated. For days, he did not leave his hidden corner in the village. He simply sat there, mourning the loss of the child he believed was his. His heart shattered. No longer did he parade the streets or make people laugh. Instead, he wept and mumbled to himself, too lost in his sorrow to beg for food. But as the days stretched on, hunger began gnawing at Onyara, and he had no choice but to venture out again. However, something had changed in him. The once cheerful madman had become filled with anger and aggression. Whenever he saw a woman with a baby, he would rush towards her, his eyes wild with desperation, shouting, "Give me my baby! Give me my Mwachi!" His voice would boom, and he was so frantic that he was willing to bite or claw at anyone who tried to stop him. His behavior terrified the villagers, and soon people became too afraid to go out with their children. Mothers clutched their babies tightly when they saw him, and the once laughing villagers now watched Onyara with worried eyes, frightened of what he might do next. Meanwhile, Chief Meze, the wealthy man who had taken Mwachi from Onyara, rushed the child to a hospital. The baby's health had worried him from the moment he had laid his eyes on him, and now the doctors confirmed his worst fears. Mwachi had infections, and the worst was that he had a hole in his heart, a life-threatening condition. The doctors recommended immediate surgery, and without hesitation, Chief Meze arranged for the child to be flown abroad for treatment. It was a risky procedure, but there was no other option if Mwachi was to survive. By some miracle, the surgery was a success. Mwachi's tiny heart was healed, and slowly the child began to thrive. It amazed everyone how he managed to survive for so long with such a serious condition. The boy's resilience was nothing short of a miracle. As the doctors marveled at his recovery, Chief Meze made a decision. Mwachi had no family except for Onyara, and it was clear that the child could not be returned to a madman who had no way of caring for him. Chief Meze took Mwachi into his home, determined to raise him as his own son. He provided the boy with everything he needed: love, education, and a chance at a better life. As Nwachi grew older, he blossomed into a bright and clever boy. He excelled in school, always eager to learn, and soon became known as one of the smartest in his class. Chief Meze was proud of him, but he knew that the boy needed to know the truth about his past. When Nwachi was old enough to understand, Chief Meze told him about the man who had called him his son, the madman Onyara. Though it was a difficult story to hear, Nwachi felt a strange connection to the madman who had cared for him, even in his madness. From time to time, Chief Meze would take Nwachi to visit Onyara at the psychiatric hospital where he had been taken in an effort to help him. But despite the best treatment, nothing seemed to cure Onyara's mind. He remained trapped in his madness, his thoughts always returning to the baby he had lost. Whenever Nwachi visited him, Onyara's eyes would light up, and for a moment he seemed as though he recognized the boy. He would call out, "Nwachi, my child," with the same love and joy he had shown when he had first found the baby under the rain. But the joy would quickly fade, and he would slip back into his confused state, lost in his own world. Still, Nwachi visited him, hoping that one day the man who had once saved him might find peace. Though he was growing up in a different world, Nwachi never forgot the madman who had held him close and called him my baby. Many years passed, and life seemed to settle into its new rhythm. Nwachi grew stronger and wiser under Chief Meze's care, while Onyara remained in the psychiatric hospital lost in his madness. But fate had not forgotten him, and neither had the gods. One fateful day, a group of missionaries visited the psychiatric home as part of their outreach to pray with the patients. They moved from one person to the next, offering prayers and words of hope. When they reached Onyara, they laid their hands on him, just as they had with everyone else. But something strange happened. As they prayed, they received a powerful revelation. It was not an ordinary revelation. It revealed the truth behind Onyara's condition. The missionaries gasped in shock. Onyara's madness was not due to illness or any natural cause. No, his condition had been caused by something much darker. They saw that Onyara was not a mere madman wandering the streets. He was the only son of a wealthy king who had once ruled a vast and prosperous kingdom called Ofala, not far from Amandu. Years ago, Onyara had been a bright young man studying abroad and preparing to take over his father's throne. But tragedy struck when his father died suddenly. Instead of returning to claim his rightful place as king, Onyara's life took a terrible turn. His uncle, King Obisieke, had been consumed by greed and power. He wanted the throne for himself and was willing to do anything to get it. Using dark magic, Obisieke cast a spell on his nephew, driving him mad and leaving him to wander the streets as a raving lunatic. Then, he bribed the kingdom's chiefs and lied to the people, telling them that Onyara was dead. With no one to challenge him, Obisieke took over the throne and all of Onyara's father's wealth, ruling the kingdom with a wicked heart. As the missionaries prayed, tears filled their eyes. They shook their heads in sorrow at the terrible injustice done to Onyara. They knew they had to help him with more intense prayers. They called upon divine power to break the evil spell, and slowly, As if waking from a long nightmare, Onyara's mind began to clear. His eyes, which had been clouded with confusion for years, suddenly brightened. He blinked, looked around and realized he was in the hospital. He touched his face, his body, and then looked at the missionaries, his voice trembling. What? What happened to me? The missionaries told him everything about his madness, how they had found him and the terrible betrayal by his uncle. Onyara's heart was heavy with sorrow, but the weight of years of confusion and suffering seemed to lift off from him. For the first time in years, he was himself again. The hospital staff quickly called Chief Meze with the astonishing news that Onyara had regained his sanity. Chief Meze wasted no time. He gathered Nwachi, now a young man, and they rushed to the hospital. When they arrived, Onyara stood there, looking lost but sane. The moment he saw Nwachi, something deep inside him stirred. Though he had forgotten so much, he remembered the child he had found in the rain, somewhere in the bush all those years ago. His heart swelled with emotion as he knelt down and embraced Nwachi. "My child," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. Then he told Chief Meze and everyone present how he had found Nwachi. "I found him in the bush one day, under the rain." The reunion was joyous and emotional. Nwachi hugged him back tightly, sensing that this was the man who had saved his life when he was just a helpless baby. Chief Meze stood by, smiling with pride, knowing that he had played a part in reuniting father and son. But far away in the kingdom of Ofala, something strange was happening. King Obiseke, Onyara's wicked uncle, was standing before the villagers, addressing them as he often did. But in the middle of his speech, he suddenly began to behave erratically. His eyes rolled back in his head and he started to shout uncontrollably. "I killed my brother," he screamed. "I made my nephew mad. It was me. I stole the throne." The villagers watched in horror as the king pulled off his royal robes, his body shaking with madness. "Abomination!" the villagers cried, shocked by the king's sudden confessions. The truth of his evil deeds echoed through the village like thunder. As King Obiseke continued to scream and tear at his clothes, some of the angriest men in the crowd grabbed stones and hurled them at him. They chased him out of the village, calling him a traitor and a murderer. The kingdom of Ofala was in chaos, but justice had finally been served. The evil that had been done to Onyara had been exposed, and the people were now free from the rule of a wicked king. Onyara, now known by his real name Chizoba, returned to his kingdom, Ofala, with his son Nwachi, who was now a strong and handsome young man. Chizoba was a spitting image of his late father, the former king, and the villagers recognized him immediately. The moment Chizoba set foot in the village, the people burst into celebration. After all those years, their true heir had returned to claim his rightful place on the throne. Drums echoed through the air, and the village was decorated with bright colors as they welcomed their new king. The elders quickly organized a grand ceremony. The entire kingdom gathered to witness Chizoba's coronation. Dressed in the royal robes that once belonged to his father, Chizoba stood tall, proud and grateful. The crown was placed on his head, and the crowd cheered with joy. He had not only reclaimed his title but also restored the honor of his family. His first words as king were filled with gratitude. He looked out at the sea of faces and gave special thanks to Chief Meze, the man who had taken care of his son and helped him regain his sanity. To honor Chief Meze's kindness, Chizoba gifted him vast lands, gold and precious treasures from the kingdom. It was a reward for a man with a good heart. Nwachi, now the crowned prince, stood beside his father, a living symbol of hope and resilience. The people of the kingdom loved him deeply, not only because he was their future king, but because he had survived against all odds. He was known for his intelligence, kindness and humility, and everyone admired how he carried himself, just like his father. The kingdom was at peace and everything seemed to be falling into place. Meanwhile, the news of Chizoba, the former madman, who had now become king, spread like wildfire all through the neighboring kingdoms, villages including Amando. People couldn't stop talking about it, and it became the subject of gossip in every marketplace. Who could believe that a madman from the kingdom next to us is now a king? People whispered, and to think he raised a child he found in the bush during a rainstorm. The more people talked, the more the story spread. One day, as Chinasa was returning from the market with her basket full of food, she overheard a group of women gossiping nearby. They were whispering about a baby that had been picked up from the bush many years ago by a madman who was now a king. I heard he picked the baby on a rainy day and cared for him as if he was his own child, one of the women said. Who could have thrown such an innocent baby away? Chinasa's heart stopped. Her mind raced as she recalled that terrible night. The night Ado had forced her to abandon their son Obinna in the bush. Her heart pounded in her chest and her legs suddenly felt too weak to carry her. Could it be? Could the baby they were talking about be her Obinna? She needed to know. She couldn't let this chance slip by. Nervously, she approached the women, her voice trembling. Excuse me. I heard you talking about a baby found in the bush on a rainy night. Can you tell me more? The women looked at her curiously, but one of them responded, Yes, it's true. There's a madman from a village not too far from ours. He found the baby crying in the rain many years ago. The madman is now a king, and that baby, his son, is the prince. It's a miracle, really, one that shall never end, my sister. Chinasa's eyes filled with tears. She couldn't hold back the flood of emotions crashing over her. Was this really happening? Could her son, the child she thought she had lost forever, really be alive? Was the boy who had been raised by the madman now a king, her Obinna? Her heart ached with a mixture of hope, guilt and sorrow as she hurried home to tell Ado everything she had just heard. When she reached home, her voice cracked as she shared the news with her husband Ado. She began, her hands shaking. I heard something at the market today. They say a madman found a baby in the bush on a rainy night many years ago. Could it be our Obinna? Ado stood there speechless. His eyes welled up with tears as the weight of his past decisions crushed him. He had never forgiven himself for that night, for letting his anger and frustration lead him to abandon his own child. He had always feared that Obinna had perished in the wild, and the guilt had haunted him for years. Now hearing that his son might still be alive, the emotions overwhelmed him. His knees grew weak and he sat down, burying his face in his hands. "We shouldn't have done it," Chinasa continued, her voice filled with pain. "We shouldn't have thrown him away. Our Obinna, he's alive. Ado, he's alive." Ado, now much older and wiser, broke down in tears. He had tried to forget, but the past had always lingered, a dark shadow over his life. Life had been hard ever since that fateful night. They had struggled to find happiness even though they had two more children. Yet the loss of Obinna had always left a void in their hearts. Now they had a chance to make things right. "We must find him," Ado said, his voice thick with emotion. "We must ask for his forgiveness." Chinasa nodded. Together they made up their minds to seek out their son, no matter the distance, and beg for his forgiveness. They hoped that one day they could be a family again. The very next day, Chinasa and Ado set out for the kingdom of Ofala, their hearts heavy with a mix of anticipation and fear. As they approached the palace, tears filled their eyes. There, standing tall and regal, was their son Obinna, now called Prince Nwachi. He was no longer the sick, helpless baby that they had once abandoned. He had grown into a handsome young man, his strong features mirroring Ado's so clearly that it almost felt like looking into a mirror. They could hardly believe it. Their son, once left to die, was now a prince. As soon as Ado saw Obinna, the weight of his past mistakes came crushing over him. He fell to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably, filled with deep regret and shame. "My son," he cried, "I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I should never have let you go." His voice cracked with pain, the years of guilt overwhelming him. Obinna looked at them, confused. They were invited into the king's chamber and they sat with King Chizoba, the man who had saved their son, and shared their painful story with him. Chinasa's voice trembled as she recounted that dark night when they had left their child in the bush, believing it was the only way. King Chizoba listened, tears filling his eyes. He had grown to love Nwachi as his own child. But now, the moment had come for Nwachi to decide who he would choose: the parent who had abandoned him or the father who had raised him. The room fell silent, heavy with emotion. Everyone waited anxiously for Nwachi's decision. After a long pause, Nwachi finally spoke, his voice calm and steady. "I forgive you, mother. I forgive you, father," he said, looking at them with kind eyes. "I know you were frustrated and lost. And who knows, if I had stayed with you, I might not be alive today. But God had another plan for me. However," he continued, "I cannot return to you. I belong here. King Chizoba took me in when you threw me away. Even when he was lost in madness, he cared for me. He gave me a home when I had none. I am all he has, just as he is all I have. You have other children now, but I choose to stay here. This is my home." Ado and Chinasa wept, their hearts aching. Though they understood their son's choice, it was still painful to hear. They had lost him once and now they were losing him again. King Chizoba, seeing their grief, spoke gently. "Because of your son, you will never be poor again. You may not have him in your home, but you are still his parents. Come live in my kingdom. I will give you a land, build you a house and provide for you. And when our son becomes king, he will ensure that you live the rest of your lives in peace and happiness." Chinasa and Ado were deeply touched by the king's kindness. They thanked him for his generosity and left the palace. But even with the king's offer, the memory of that terrible night, the night they abandoned their son, could never be erased. It would stay with them forever as a lesson learned the hardest way. As they walked away, their hearts heavy with both sadness and gratitude, they couldn't help but reflect on the harsh truth. No matter how difficult life becomes, no child should ever be thrown away. Years passed, and King Chizoba grew old. Prince Nwachi, the boy, who had once been cast aside, became the new king of Ofala. He married the love of his life, and together they ruled the kingdom with compassion and wisdom. The people of Ofala adored him, for he was not only a kind ruler but also a symbol of resilience and grace. Nwachi's journey from an abandoned child to a beloved king was known far and wide, reminding everyone that even the smallest, most helpless child can rise to greatness. And in his reign, there was peace, love, and kindness in the great kingdom of Ofala. Hey besties, thank you for watching this amazing story. And I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it. I would like you to share your lessons in the comment section. And if you are yet to subscribe to this channel, please subscribe and turn on your notification bell so that you get notified whenever we post stories. Thank you so much for all your love, your support, your encouragement. They mean a lot to me. And they've continued to push us to make more interesting stories. Right now, I'll have to go and see you in our next story. Bye!